for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to come here. I'm not going to be standing here saying, please give me your vote. That's not what this is about. It's actually trying to give a report on where we are in the various pension schemes. Now, obviously, at Loughborough, you're involved with the dispute in terms of the University Superannuation Scheme, USS. I work at London Metropolitan University and a member of the Teachers' Pension Scheme. However, the point I want to make is I think the actual two pension schemes and our disputes related to both pension schemes are inextricably linked. And I think it's actually quite important, therefore, for you to have information on what's happening with TPS, and also, I suppose, for me to give you a bit of an opinion based on the knowledge of what I understand what's going on with regards to USS and how I think the two are connected together. Really, I'll start with. I'll start with what I'm much more familiar with, and it's just the Teachers' Pension Scheme. Now, as you may know, obviously, you were on strike with the rest of us on November the 30th in terms of defending public pensions. In reality, actually, it wasn't just defending public pensions, it was actually fighting for fair pensions for all. And that's always been our line as a union, in liaison with all of the other public sector unions. This isn't about gold-plated pensions for public sector workers. Not that we have gold-plated pensions in any case, but it was about fairness. It was about fairness for all workers in terms of having a decent retirement. And that goes from the public sector to the private sector, where at the moment, actually, there are various disputes, such as Unilever, who are fighting, for instance, to retain their final salary scheme and to continue to get a reasonable pension, on the basis that such pensions are our deferred wages. We have been paying for them. Part and parcel of our contract when we came into the industry was that we would have a reasonable pension in retirement. And I think we have to start from that basis before we even start looking at some of the detail of the changes that have been put forward. Now, in terms of the public pension scheme, the Teachers' Pension Scheme, the main one of them, in terms of our concern, what we have been told by the government, what they want to do to them, is they want to increase our contributions. Now, in TPS, our current contribution rate is 6.4% of salary. That's how much we pay in on a month-by-month basis. They want to increase that to 9.6%. And obviously they say it's a 3.2% increase. Anybody who can do maths realizes it's not 3.2% increase, it's actually a 50% increase in terms of our contributions. And that is very significant, because that increase ranges from around £20–30 a week for our very lowest paid workers in further education. But obviously the Teachers' Pension Scheme is further education in post-92, all the way up to £100 odd per month in terms of some of our more highly paid members of staff. Now, in that situation, it's a direct pay cut. And those changes are going to be implemented from April the 1st this year. Hence, when I come on to talk about where I think we are industrially, you understand the urgency of the situation. Now, that's just one of the changes. The other changes is to tie our retirement age to that of the state retirement age, which is going to be going up to 68 at the moment, and there are some in the cabinet who are talking about raising it to 70. And like most of you, our current retirement age is 60. That's a significant increase of 7 to 8 years of paying 50% more contributions. So we're going to be working longer, probably dying earlier because we're working longer. We're going to be working longer, and we're going to be paying 50% more. Now, you might think that would mean that we'll get an awful lot more when we do eventually get the chance to retire. Unfortunately, they're also talking about closing the final salary schemes and converting them into a care scheme. Now, there is a debate, and anybody who ever looks at the activist list can go into the minutiae of the debate about the differences between final salary and care. And it is true to say that if you have a care scheme that has a particularly good revaluation rate, a revaluation and an accrual rate, you could get in the situation where it was equivalent to final salary. That is not what is being offered by the government. And in the case of USS, it's certainly not what's being offered by the employers. What's being put forward, originally it was on the basis of a 1/60th accrual, but indexed against CPI rather than RPI, which is what our current final salary is indexed against. Now, in that situation, for almost every member of staff, that means their accumulated pension will go down. Okay, so we're going to be working longer, quite a lot longer for some of our younger members. Those younger members proportionately are going to be paying more, and they're going to get an awful lot less for the honour of doing so. Paying more, getting less, working longer. And then when we do finally get that lower pension, every year, rather than being indexed to inflation, which we believe goes with RPI, it's now going to be indexed with CPI, and therefore we're going to take, and the projections are, a 15 to 20% cut over the lifetime of drawing your pension. So this is an attack on every level. And that's what we've been facing, and that's what we've been attempting to combat, both as an individual union, but also in concert with our colleagues in the other public sector unions. Because although there's 4 different sets of pension schemes, we're in with the teachers one, there's the civil service one, there's the health one, there's the local government one, all are more or less being attacked on the same basis. There are some differences in terms of the accumulation rates that are being offered, etc. We are now in the position, after taking action, and very successful action in terms of the numbers involved, to where we got to the point on the 30th of November of having, and you read various figures, but I think everybody accepted somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5 million, but we're talking millions rather than hundreds of thousands. A very large public sector strike, very well supported. And actually, when you look at the opinion polls at the time, which they tended to take off quite quickly because it didn't give them the answer they were looking for, the opinion polls were 60, 70, 75% in support of that strike action, in support of people standing up for their pensions, which they'd always been promised. Now, in that situation, the government has made some movement. It'd be a lie for me to get up here and say they've offered no changes at all. They have made some movement. In terms of the teachers' pension scheme, the movement that they've made is to say, right, rather than a 1/60th accrual in a care scheme, we'll move to a 1/57th accrual rate, a slight improvement. And rather than the revaluation taking place in terms of CPI, it'll be CPI plus 1.6%. Now, I don't want to go in too much into the maths of this. Clearly, it means that people who've been in the pension scheme for the full 40 years, which is not that common, by the way, if you look at further education, where the average is 15 years, because a lot of people come into FE after being in other careers. However, there is some improvement relative to what was previously being offered, but it's marginal improvement. There is no movement whatsoever on the change in retirement age. There is no movement whatsoever on the increase in contributions. There is no movement whatsoever in terms of the RPI to CPI in terms of pensions in payment. There's been no movement at all on any of that. There has been some movement with regards to the accrual rates in terms of care, but that's all. There has been some analysis. The London Retired Members Branch, who have a lot of people who, well, one are pensioners and two who spend a lot of time looking at the figures, they've worked out in terms of having an equivalent accrual rate with regards to what we currently have, we would have to be offered something in the region of 1/50th in order that then just to be an equivalent. And that's not taking into consideration the increase in contributions. Okay, so we're still getting less for all of that more that we'll be doing and all of that more that we will be paying. And I think that's quite important to put that out there. Now, obviously, it's a foreign pension to you, so that you're in. In terms of USS, the situation is this. Up until fairly recently, i.e. up until October when they imposed the changes upon us, it used to be the case that USS was seen as the far better pension scheme than TPS. And clearly we have members, especially in this environment, that move from one scheme to the other as they move sector. That happens a lot, or as they move between, say, post-92 and pre-92 institutions. Now, with the changes that have been imposed upon you, you are getting a far worse deal than the deal that we are rejecting. Because it's hit new members of the pension scheme coming in. And this is where I think the discussion matters. Because what has been safeguarded at least for the time being, and I'll use the word at least for the time being, is those currently in the scheme maintain their final salary. You're still paying more because your contributions have also gone up, but you maintain your final salary. However, in terms of the revaluation, in terms of all of those things, they're now going to be tied to CPI and, far worse, with various caps. And a lot of people, of course, sometimes leave the scheme for a period of time, and I think in this case, I think it's now up to 30 months. If it goes beyond that time, of course, you then come in as though you were a new joiner, in which case you get all of the conditions that are now being imposed on the new starters. Now the problem there, of course, is those new starters are getting a real shoddy deal. In fact, I wouldn't call it a deal, since what they're actually getting is a situation where they are now working longer, paying substantially more, and getting substantially less in terms of the various accrual rates that have been put forward. Now, in that situation, we went into dispute, you went into dispute, you've taken action, you've been working to rule, and all of those other things, which I think that action, in combination with what's happening with the public sector schemes and the fact that we've been resisting those enforced changes, has shone a light on just how bad the offer in USS is. Well, I'm calling it an offer, they've imposed it. Just how bad the imposition is. And I think that's forcing them now, with the action, it's forcing them to come back to talks. And I think that's what you're going to be debating, hopefully in a moment, in terms of, well, what's your position in terms of those talks going into a special sector conference for pre-92 institutions, which will take place at the end of this month. Now, the reason why I thought it was important to mention what's happening in TPS, if you look at what's come from our negotiators, the two things that are now being offered in terms of USS is that one of the most pernicious changes that they made was the fact that if you took, if you were made, usually made rather than took, isn't it? If you were made redundant and you were 55 or over, you could get your full pension. You know, that was in there. Obviously they decided as part of their changes that as from October 12th, October 2013, that was no longer going to be the case. One of the things that they put forward is that we will review this together with UCU negotiators. We will review this, and in the process of reviewing it, we will suspend that change until October 2014. Because of the one-year suspension. That's an improvement, and it's an important improvement. They've also said, given what is happening with the public schemes, I don't want to spell it out, but i.e. TPS, and given the fact that we now look ridiculous compared to what negotiations are taking place there, we will talk to you about some of maybe our accrual rate, maybe the inflation capping, which is clearly a major issue. Because obviously the thing with inflation capping, you can't just look at what the inflation rate is this year. You have to look at what the inflation rate is over the whole lifetime of a pension, which could be 40 years of accumulation. In which case, if you have a period of a few years where you get significant, say, stagflation, where you actually get inflation going above 5%, going above 10%, as we had for a large period of the mid-70s to the early 80s, then actually it's an accumulative effect. So if they're capping that, well, they're capping it at sort of, it's a gradated capping, isn't it, at 5% and then a maximum at 10%. If it's going above 5% and it's below 10%, you are going to be losing money. If it goes above 10%, you're getting clobbered, accumulatively. So they're going to talk about some of those things. There isn't a particular time limit on these talks, as far as we can see, at the moment. They said, we'll try to complete by July 2012. But in order for this to take place, and this is what the discussion now is, we'd like you to suspend your action. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky, really, from a like I say, I work at London Met, I've had 10 years of internecine conflict, I'm used to negotiating. And at this point, you've got them into a position of negotiating on the basis of both some industrial muscle, but also the political context. Now in that situation, it's not normally a good idea to put the thing that got them in there down. Precisely when you haven't got those real guarantees. And more importantly, when what is likely to be happening is that the members of UCU, together with other teaching unions, are likely to continue action in TPS to improve any offer we've already got. Now you want to be in a position where, in a sense, you not only benefit from whatever offer that is, because that's going to be part and parcel of the talks, but you want to be in a position where actually you're strengthening the success of that fight with TPS, because it will have a direct bearing on what will happen to you. You know, and I was trying to work on the basis that we're one union. Okay, we might have different sectors, but at the end of the day, we're one union, and we need to actually, I think, play to our strengths in order to defend our weakest. And in my argument would be, the weakest that we have got to be protecting for our own good, never mind any other reasonable reason, is our younger members, and our members that will be coming into the profession. These are the ones, whether they're in TPS or whether they're in USS, are now being clobbered. And the fact is, if the TPS dispute goes down, and we get an imposed care scheme, and your younger members have got an imposed care scheme within USS, the guarantee that they're not going to touch those of you in final salary schemes now, I think, is not worth any paper it is written on. Because I think precisely what's happened with TPS, where we'd negotiated an agreement with them 5 years ago, they'll come back for more. Because that's what happens with bullies. Once they get away with something and they think they can continue to get away with it, they keep on coming back. And my opinion is, now, given the unity we've already seen, and given the strength, and I think we have got strength, and we shouldn't pretend that we are weak. Given our strength of the movement, I think now is actually the time to fight back. That's my opinion. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mark.